to serve hard times.
To a 6-year-old me, Nailz was genuinely disturbing. Of course he was. He's this monster, huge man who speaks like the devil and looks like he'd jump out of the TV to strangle you in front of your parents. Even at the age of 6, I knew the Undertaker wasn't actually a dead man. That'd be impossible. But it was entirely possible for Nailz to be an escaped convict looking for revenge on the Big Boss Man, because the Boss Man was a real prison officer. I honestly think the character of Nailz was an inspired creation and could have gone really far, and perhaps the gimmick would have gone further if it wasn't for the direct actions of one Kevin Wacholz, the man who played the character, who almost murdered Vince McMahon in real life. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Bret Hart said, "I thought it was a good gimmick. He was a pretty scary looking guy, a formidable looking guy. He was about 6'4", 6'5". He looked like a badass dude from a prison or a chain gang or something. Gimmick-wise, I think it was a good gimmick. He had a good look and a good idea, and Nailz was a great name." The Big Boss Man, WWF's resident correctional officer, had renounced his evil ways at the turn of the 90s and decided to live a life devoted to the good fight, and then the fans embraced him as a babyface. So what better time for one of his mortal enemies to break out of the clink and come after him in the Fed? A series of promos aired on WWF television with Nailz claiming to be innocent of the crimes he was incarcerated for, alleged that the Big Boss Man had abused him during his time behind bars. The promos were very effective. Wacholz looked utterly psychotic in the role, and his voice had been modified to provide maximum menace. Check out this promo from 1992.
I've only got one thing to say, and that's to the Big Boss Man. Boss Man, I'll give you credit. You were one of the toughest screws in the joint. Probably the toughest one I've ever met. But let me tell you something, Boss Man. There are no more steel bars between us anymore. There are no more handcuffs on me, and I no longer wear leg irons. Boss Man, you can no longer turn the fire extinguisher hose on me in the middle of the night. You can no longer reach the bars and harass me. Boss Man, there's a new sheriff in town, and you're looking at him, boy. It's your turn to serve hard time.
If you get the chance, have a look at that promo online, because you'll see what I mean about Wacholz looking psychotic. He really played the character well. Like so many things in wrestling, this could have spilled over into looking fake, essentially, or hokey, if it wasn't been played with such conviction. We don't know what Nailz was incarcerated for, and it didn't matter. That wasn't the point. He had a vendetta against the Big Boss Man, and he was coming to get him. Things don't need to be complicated in wrestling, and often the best feuds are like this one. I wish they'd do more stuff like this today. Before joining the WWF, Kevin Wacholz had a long tenure, starting as a tough man before training to be a wrestler, and then working his way through the AWA and FMW before joining the Fed full-time at the start of 1992. There were long-term plans in place for Nailz to be a major heel long-term, with a main event program against The Undertaker being set up for the winter period of 1992. The WWF magazine even featured the feud on the front cover. Little did anyone know, though, that Nailz wouldn't last even a year, and nobody could ever predict that Nailz would ironically help save Vince McMahon from serving a lengthy prison sentence that would have changed the course of wrestling in the 90s forever. An attack on the Big Boss Man occurred during a squash match on the 30th March edition of WWF Superstars. Clad in an orange jumpsuit, Nailz assaulted the Boss Man with his nightstick, repeatedly smashing him in the face with it. To sell the injury, the Bossman was kept out of the ring for several months, while Nailz continued to cut genuinely unsettling promos towards him through the spring of 1992, as he went on a rampage of squash matches against local talents in different towns and cities, before steamrolling into SummerSlam at Wembley Stadium in London for a match against Virgil, which he won in quick fashion. This match against Virgil would turn out to be the catalyst for the events we'll talk about in a few moments. Not that anyone at the time knew it. Fast forward to November 1992. It was time to complete the storyline Nailz was brought in to do. A nightstick on a pole match at Survivor Series saw him battle his nemesis, the Big Boss Man. Rules being that the first person to retrieve the nightstick was allowed to beat the tar out of his opponent with it. As you'll see in my other videos, I do tend to look upon things in wrestling with a touch of optimism, but I genuinely think that Nailz gets a bad rap for being a poor worker in the ring. I think really for a big guy wrestler at the time, there were far worse guys around, and I'd probably put him in the same league in terms of work as the likes of Sid Vicious. For a 6.5 foot guy, I don't think he moved around too badly at all. Well, I've got to say, his stranglehold, which was one of his signature moves, had the loosest looking grip on it I've ever seen. If you watch this match at the Survivor Series against the Bossman, he barely even touches the Bossman's neck when he's trying to put that grip on, and it's not very convincing at all, shall we say. Anyway, to finish the feud, the Bossman wins, and that was that. The game plan, as I mentioned earlier, was for Nailz to move on to a feud with the Undertaker. If only Kevin hadn't decided to try and strangle Vince McMahon to death, then I think we would have definitely seen that programme. So it was around the time shortly after the Bossman feud that wrestlers started getting paid for their work earlier in the year. SummerSlam 1992 was held in front of a massive crowd of 80,000 people in London, one of the biggest gates ever recorded at the time, thanks to the Fed's soaring popularity in the UK. Everyone was expecting a massive bonus thanks to the size of the audience. It's no exaggeration to say that Wacholz was absolutely furious when he saw how much he'd made from the event. Despite pocketing an additional $8,000 on top of his guarantee, I don't know whether he'd seen one of the other guys' pay slips or something like that and thought he'd been lowballed, but apparently to him an extra $8,000 wasn't enough in his pay packet. So it was on the 14th of December in Green Bay that Wacholz almost killed Vince. I was right there. I might have been one of the best witnesses to the whole thing. I was right outside the door. I didn't see it happen, but I could hear all of it. He was shrieking. Nailz was shrieking in a really high-pitched, shrill shriek of anger. He was clearly losing it badly, but I had no idea. He was saying he'd been lied to and he was tired of the bull and the lies. Then I heard a big bang and a gurgling sound. Luckily for Vince, a number of his agents pulled Wacholz off before he was choked to death, and the police were called. There were reports that Vince actually turned blue due to the strangulation. Oddly, Wacholz told the police that Vince had tried to sexually molest him, and Vince was arrested, but luckily that accusation was later dropped. And that was the end of Nailz in the WWF. Moving forward, Vince would have more problems to deal with heading into 1993 that would initially make Nailz seem like a long-distant memory, I'm sure. This was the time when Vince was charged by the US Attorney for obtaining steroids. This is the famous steroid trial. This scandal almost sent Vince to prison for years. However, the case was handled in a really sloppy manner. Part of that was to do with the half-hearted witness statements, and this is how Nailz inadvertently saved Vince from prison. Wacholz decided to testify against Vince McMahon during his steroid trial, saying that McMahon had to try to force steroids on him at the start of his contract. Wacholz's testimony was considered to not be credible for a number of reasons, including the fact that Vince was already aware that he was under investigation when he hired Wacholz earlier in the year, so was unlikely to have suggested steroid use to him. Other factors included Nailz wearing a jumpsuit to the ring, so the point was made, why would Vince have suggested to use steroids if nobody could see his body in the first place? Which made no sense. And Nailz put the final nail in the coffin for himself, so to speak, and the testimony, when he admitted on the stand to literally hating Vince McMahon's guts. So right there in one testimony, Wacholz had managed to convince the jury that McMahon was not to be convicted, and therefore saving him, ironically, from years in prison. The irony in this story is just incredible. The fact that the character was an ex-con, the fact that Vince McMahon almost became a convict, and the fact that Wacholz managed to dig his own grave through his own words, essentially, and get McMahon off the hook. I've always thought that Vince McMahon's got a really lucky streak in him, hasn't he? It's amazing. I think that's an incredible story anyway. If you've got any stories like this that you'd like me to make videos about, then feel free to let me know down in the comments. And feel free to subscribe for more videos like this. And I'll speak to you all again in the next one.